I still remember exactly how we started out back then. Basically, it was all there. Cars, a workshop, garages, gas, ramps, everything you needed to get into the racing business big. We just had one problem. We needed some hot drivers. Drivers who were prepared to risk their necks for us. So we did it the right way and organized a kind of qualifying test. We wanted the best, and we weren't going to settle for less. Tony and his crew were responsible for the organization of the garage and building the stunt elements. The shop was just a front. In Tony's shop, we got the money back that we'd paid out previously to the drivers as prize money. Some of it anyway. Then we put all the cash back into the construction of new stunt elements. Big ramps, small ramps, loops, you name it. Like we built a course for our up-and-coming talents that consisted entirely of small ramps. That's where they gained their first experience in the league. At first, the idea with the DVDs didn't go down too good with the bosses at all. Too much publicity. It took a while for them to realize that the sales of the videos indirectly affected the income from the betting offices. The more videos we sold, the more the dimwits shoveled their money into the betting offices. From there on in, we were on a roll. Man, we made so much cash it was like the whole world belonged to us. Hey, remember Mansfield Speedway? Even before the track was officially opened, we organized a race there. People loved us for having ideas like that. Flat Shoals was ideal for our purposes. Remote, lonely, not much more than a wide place in the road, way out in the middle of nowhere. A good place to solve problems. If anybody caused us trouble, Flat Shoals was a solution. You just had to know what you're doing and give the farmers a couple of bottles of spiked booze to make sure that they slept well. Pigs don't ask questions about what they're being fed, but farmers do. And if farmers ask questions, you can be sure that you're going to have to spend the whole damn night solving even more problems. Yeah, races were held in Flat Shoals too, of course, like the off-road stage race, for example. With all that money, it was clear that sooner or later someone was going to try to take a slice of the pie. You always have small losses, especially where cash flows. Here and there, people pocket a little on the side. Hey, what the heck? We took it into account and nobody minded much. But when bets were manipulated by people other than us, and drivers were obviously being bribed, it was time to fire a warning shot. Pretty soon, we had two guys in our sights that had had their fingers in the till just a little too often. Then it was just a matter of finding a driver who'd teach the two a lesson. Somebody trustworthy and expendable. Hold the Flag was one of my favorite events. It was just a matter of finding a big yellow smiley face out in the field and taking it through the checkpoints. When Tony turned up with the thing for the first time, we all wondered if he was going nuts. I mean, just imagine it. You come to work one morning and there's this big yellow thing standing out in the yard and grinning at you. At the time, we didn't have a lot of time to discuss it. The bosses were breathing down our necks because of the lost betting income, so we used it. Yeah, looking back, it was a good idea. That grin turned out to be an unexpected gold mine, and we were back in the boss's favor. We didn't have too much trouble with the cops. I only remember one time I really got worried. Due to the business with the bribes, we still had a couple of packages we needed to dispose of in Flat Shoals. Everything was prepared, and it looked like it was just going to be another routine run. Man, you plan everything carefully. Fill the tank, make a couple of sandwiches for the journey, and then the cops tow you away because you parked in a no-parking zone. And all because your wife forgets to buy tomatoes and you want to be a good husband. Luckily, the cops towed the car straight to the pound. Boy, if they'd opened the trunk, we'd have been screwed. We had to get the car out of there as fast as possible. My face was known all over town, so only one of the drivers really could be considered for the job. So we thought we dealt with two of the black sheep, but evidently we hadn't got the message across. There were still a couple of no-goods out there who just didn't want to get it. The solution was a knockout race. Nobody liked driving with a bomb in his car that exploded if he was placed last in a lap, especially if he had a skeleton in the closet and knew that Tony's crew could rig his car or its protective armor plate anytime they liked. Drivers who hesitated made themselves suspicious from the onset, and those who did take part could never be sure just how much we knew. We reckoned on the drivers getting nervous and making mistakes. Rules are rules, okay? Drivers who wanted to get into the professional league had to complete a bomb run. Anyone who was crazy enough to take part had to drive a fully tanked iron horse with a bomb attached to the roof. This bomb was equipped with a velocity fuse. If the car fell below a minimum speed, it blew up. Easy as that. Believe me, wild horses couldn't have gotten me in that car. A single person is always easier to keep under control and put under pressure than a motley crew of bums that can put their heads together and get crazy ideas. That's why I'd rather have done without the teams altogether. But on the other hand, it was the team races that tripled our turnover. A lot of the fans began to identify with a particular team and cheered for them at every meeting. Should I not have taken advantage of that? You be the judge. The Hawks, for example, were a very popular stunt team. They couldn't wait to throw their hard-earned money at us. Crashday became the highlight of the week in these guys' humdrum everyday life. But when we introduced the team wrecking event, everyone totally flipped out. In team wrecking, there was nothing that couldn't be turned into cash. Fan articles, videos, remote control fire spitters for the kids, even a dented fender could be sold for a couple of grand. It was unbelievable. And the enthusiasm of the people knew no bounds. You remember the tunnel races? Barely room to maneuver and 5 or 6 vehicles simultaneously on a bomb run. Sheer suicide, if you ask me. In any case, for every smashed tile in the tunnel walls, there was a story circulating on the internet. After a while, I used to drive down there myself for the hell of it and smash a couple of tiles just to add a little grist to the rumor mill. The favorite event for a lot of the drivers was Off-Road Madness, a stunt show in which the drivers could give everything and have a load of fun. Yeah, true, wrecking matches were more lucrative, but we had to keep our boys happy. Who wants to sit in a car the whole time that's being shot to pieces from all sides? Let's face it, only someone who has fun and enjoys his job delivers top performance. And I believe if our drivers didn't have any fun in the thing, we'd never have been able to make the Crashday League as big as it got. We even had street races where drivers could use weapons. However, a kind of code of honor had spread in the drivers' camp that prohibited the use of weaponry in a race. But of course, there was always someone who had nothing against firing a missile up the exhaust pipe of the driver in front of him. That held a certain appeal to me personally too, because races like that sold better. It started with a fight over a woman, and the bosses are allergic to that kind of thing. They just did not like women getting between the drivers. It was bad for business. Period. I collared the two hotheads and told them to settle the matter between themselves over at the old press shop. Up until that point, it was just a typical driver's camp brawl. But then out of the blue, the cops turned up. It was clear to me straight away that we were heading for a heap of trouble if the bosses ever found out about it. Every now and then, we'd do small favors for certain people. Nothing too fancy, a couple of parties, women, little things, just to make sure they owed you one. There was this one guy, a big shot from the weapons lobby, who desperately wanted to do a couple of laps in an incubator. The deal with him was extremely important for us. We had no more explosives for bomb construction, and we needed supplies urgently for the opening of a new arena. And what does this idiot do? Crashes in the first curve because he couldn't handle the car. I thought, hell, what now? But the guy climbed out of the car wreck grinning from ear to ear and signed the contract. He had the time of his life. Now with that, nothing more stood in the way of the Pass the Bomb event. We had a real challenge on our hands to offer something special for the qualification of the finals, and I was determined to get the disused container lot for it. I'd had an eye on the place for a long time because it offered optimum conditions for a wrecking match. Unfortunately, I was not the only one. There was an open tender, and a bunch of architects' offices were competing to be the ones to build a gigantic shopping mall on the lot. But the guy who had the last word in the awarding of the contract was none other than our respected mayor. That tub of lard was up to his neck in it because he'd blown his whole fortune on horses and roulette. He didn't even have the cash to pay the taxi fare to my office. In this awkward situation, I, of course, had a sympathetic ear for his problems. We owe the creation of the mountain circuit to a couple of crazy fans. Somehow, those freaks managed to find out my number, and they called me incessantly. They had this fantastic idea, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they got on my nerves so much, in the end I sent Tony over to deal with them. But instead of putting them through the mill, Tony came back with some blueprints under his arm. They'd planned out the mountain circuit down to the last detail. Racing meets Crashday. That was the basic concept. All that was left for us to do was to build the track. Big pile of scrap was a demonstration of our biggest and best stunts. The track was just bombastic. We needed huge amounts of steel and concrete for the construction of that arena. But meanwhile, the elements had gotten too big to build them in Tony's workshop exclusively. We had to get several enterprises to build it all for us and to put it up. And that's where I saw big problems. Using outside labor involved the risk of getting busted. We had to make the transition from an illegal to a legal operation. From that point on, it was essential for the Crashday League to become reputable. On paper, at least. The collaboration with the weapons and the construction lobbies enabled us to build gigantic arenas. From then on, we were no longer dependent on the hicks from the amateur league for knockout races. Problem was, the whole operation was shaky because it was still being financed with money from manipulated bets and what we managed to slip past the IRS. The bosses would only agree to play along on something of that magnitude if there was someone who'd serve as a scapegoat in a worst-case scenario. None of them wanted to spend his last years behind bars. We needed to find a straw man, someone dumb enough to take the rap just in case we were busted. The wrecker was 3 tons of steel which crushed everything that came in its path. 4 18-inch off-road tires just waiting to tear up the asphalt and mud. 413 HP lurked under the humpbacked hood, just waiting to be let loose. Damn, that thing was ugly as sin, but if you wanted to leave a wake of devastation behind you, the wrecker was the first and best choice. Frank Meyer, a classic example of the upwardly mobile career man. He really believed he got his manager job because he thought he was good. The real reason he got it was because we had him sign his name on everything. A shipment of mines for the mine battlefield? No problem, he signed. Missiles from Russia? He signed. Before, we'd have to cover ourselves against all eventualities. Now we had a guy who was officially responsible. He was perfect. He didn't ask any dumb questions, and he took care of the PR. What more could we have asked for? We knew that if we gave Meyer the position of manager, there was the danger that he might realize his real purpose as a scapegoat. So we had to keep him busy, distract him. We sent him to presentations, press conferences, let him open race circuits, make speeches, and we stuffed him full of money. And it worked. The more he saw his face in the press and on TV, the happier he became. He was actually quite creative. The super combo was his baby. The purchase of the old dump was a result of a privatization agreement. The place hadn't paid its way and devoured enormous amounts of taxpayers' money. The state was desperate to get rid of the dump, and the bosses had 2 very influential building speculators on their payroll who were in the lobby. They had instructions to procure money from guilds and cooperatives which would then be donated through Meyer to the Crashday League in a large-scale deal. And then we used the money to buy the dump. Of course, the garbage was a serious problem, so the first thing we did was pour concrete over it, which formed its characteristic 3 hills. But don't forget, the construction of this track gave the local economy a big boost. We raised $12 million in investment capital. Who was going to make things difficult for us? Airtime was the last challenge before the final battle. Here, only the best of the best survived. It was always a magnificent sight when the cars flew through the air like birds. There always seemed to be a moment of silence when a car reached the highest point. Then it was dead quiet. And then, slow at first, and then faster and faster and faster, the car plunged down and plowed into the ground. After all the troubles and tribulations, everything was ready for the big finale. The champagne for the party was on ice, the invites had gone out, the hottest women organized, and the little briefcases for the bosses were just waiting to be filled with cash and delivered. Now all that was left was the final battle. 2 drivers in a one-on-one race to decide who was the best of the best.